I never thought that something like this could happen to me, but it did. Sit back and relax and I'll tell you a real thriller from my life. I'm 72 years old, a widow for 3 years, and I run pottery classes out of the little studio Harold built for me behind the house. I can still see him in his old corduroy jacket with the elbows worn through, pretending to supervise, while really just sipping tea and reading his auction catalogs. He was an art dealer for most of his life, rare ceramics, paintings, odd little artifacts from estate sales that nobody else noticed but he knew were worth a fortune. The man could spot a Ming vase from across a crowded room without even squinting. When Harold passed, I thought I'd have to start counting every penny. Instead, I found out he'd been even better at managing our money than I'd realized. I sold a few smaller pieces quietly, nothing that would cause a stir among the collectors, and tucked the profits away. It was enough to make me certain I could keep the lights on and the kiln hot for the rest of my life. What Patrick, my only son, and his wife Lila, didn't know was that Harold had also arranged for a series of private art sales before he passed. Those sales brought in a hidden $3. $1 million that landed squarely in my accounts. I kept that detail to myself. Not out of spite, mind you, but because I know my son. Patrick has many fine qualities. He can grill a steak to perfection, and he once built me a bookshelf without swearing a single time. But subtlety is not one of them. If he knew about that money, he'd mention it in every other conversation, and Lila, well, let's just say she knows her way around a price tag. For a while after Harold's funeral, Patrick and Lila's visits were sweet, if a little awkward. But lately something had shifted. They'd run their fingers over my pottery as if they were checking for maker's marks, tilt their heads at my paintings like they were evaluating them for auction, and make little comments about how timeless certain pieces were. One afternoon, I caught Lila looking up one of my wall hangings on her phone. When I asked her if she liked it, she smiled that perfect, teeth-flashing smile of hers and said, "Oh, I was just curious." Then came the questions. "How's your will, Mom?" Patrick asked one Sunday as if he were asking whether my hydrangeas had bloomed. "Got everything organized?" Lila chimed in that sing-song voice people use when they're trying to sound casual but are really fishing for information. It wasn't just once either. Every visit had a little sprinkle of these inquiries, always wrapped in concern but somehow not. At first, I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. After all, I've been known to get suspicious when someone so much as comments on my pie recipe. But it kept happening. Little glances exchanged between the two of them when they thought I wasn't looking. Questions that had nothing to do with my health or happiness and everything to do with future planning. One Thursday afternoon, as I sat at my workbench trimming a batch of mugs, I realized my shoulders were tight from bracing every time the phone rang, wondering if it would be another conversation about getting things in order. That's when it hit me. I didn't want to spend whatever years I had left feeling like I was being sized up for an estate sale, so I decided to do something about it. Now, I'm not reckless. I wasn't about to fling accusations around without being sure. But I am, as my old friend Mabel says, more resourceful than a squirrel in October. If I wanted to know the truth, I'd have to see how they behaved when they thought time was short. Very short. That's how I came up with my plan. The next time they came over, I would tell them I'd been diagnosed with a rare neurological disease. I'd explain it in vague but alarming terms, the kind of thing that sounds both tragic and urgent, and I'd say the doctors had given me only a few weeks to live. Just enough time to get my affairs in order. It felt almost theatrical, and I'll admit, a little part of me was curious to see if I could pull off the performance. I've never acted a day in my life, but I figured I could summon a convincingly frail tone if needed. I even practiced in front of the bathroom mirror, holding a tissue for effect. Harold would have rolled his eyes, but he also would have understood exactly why I felt the need to try this. I didn't know what I'd uncover, but I knew one thing. If their love for me was real, it wouldn't matter how much money or art I had left. And if it wasn't, well, I'd rather find out now than later. When I finally worked up the nerve to deliver my news, I thought I knew what to expect. Maybe Patrick would squeeze my hand, maybe Lila would get that watery-eyed look she uses in Christmas photos. I was wrong. Patrick didn't hug me. He didn't even sit forward in his chair. He just gave this tiny cough like a radio announcer about to read the morning weather and said, "So, have you sorted out your accounts?" Lila, to her credit, at least widened her eyes. But it wasn't shock in the "oh no, Clara, not you" Sense, it was more like the way she looked at my new cobalt glaze last year. Intrigued. Evaluating. Not a single "how can we help?" Not one "what can we do to make you more comfortable?" I had barely set my coffee cup down before the conversation swerved, as if someone had changed the channel without asking me. Patrick started talking about planning ahead and making things easier on everyone. Lila chimed in to suggest that maybe now would be the perfect time to think about selling some of the more cumbersome pieces, like my antique kiln. My kiln. The same kiln Harold surprised me with on our 30th anniversary. A big, beautiful firebrick-lined monster I still use for special projects. I told them it wasn't cumbersome, it was history. Lila smiled and said, "Well, we just wouldn't want you to worry about it." And then, with the kind of confidence only someone who's never had to pay for shipping on a fragile item can have, she said, "We can help you get fair market value." Fair market value? I wanted to tell her that fair is a matter of perspective. From where I was sitting, that sounded a lot like, "Help you right into the poorhouse." I watched them bounce ideas back and forth, maybe list a few things through their contacts, maybe clear some wall space for safety. Patrick kept using the phrase "streamline your estate," which frankly made me feel like an overstuffed filing cabinet in need of sorting. They didn't ask about my doctor. They didn't ask how I was handling the symptoms. The closest I got to genuine concern was Lila asking if I was still able to teach my pottery class, but even that ended with her suggesting I wind it down to avoid unnecessary strain. I tried to keep my face neutral, but inside I felt my stomach twist. Not because I was hurt, though I was, but because their priorities were written all over their faces. They weren't here for tea and sympathy. They were here to inventory. When they finally left, I noticed Lila's eyes lingered a little too long on the corner cabinet where I keep Harold's collection of Japanese teapots. She didn't touch them, not yet, but I saw that mental sticky note being filed away. It was in that moment, as the sound of their car faded down the street, that I knew my little test was going to tell me more than I might want to hear. And judging by their first reaction, the answers weren't going to be pretty. I'm not the kind of woman who can just let things go. I've tried. I once ignored a suspicious charge on my credit card for 3 weeks before calling the bank, and it turned out to be a subscription to something called Exotic Pet Monthly that I never signed up for. Since then, I've trusted my gut, and my gut was telling me something was off. So, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, I made myself a pot of chamomile tea, sat down at Harold's old roll-top desk, and pulled out his laptop. The thing still had his anniversary date password, a habit I had told him was far too obvious, but Harold always said, if someone guesses our anniversary, they deserve to get in. Once I was in, I started poking around. Harold was meticulous with his digital folders. There was one labeled taxes, one labeled galleries, and then one simply called important. Inside important, I found years of correspondence with clients, gallery owners, and auction houses. It was in an email thread with our old auction house manager that I found it. A message from Harold, dated just 3 months before he passed. It was short and polite, as Harold's emails always were. Please send a complete record of our private collection and current valuations to my son, Patrick Morton. I want him to be familiar with these items and their worth. I must have read it 5 times before it sank in. Patrick had known, for years, exactly what I had, right down to the estimated value of the teapots, the pottery, the paintings, and not once had he ever mentioned it to me. I sat there with my tea growing cold, thinking about every conversation we'd had in the last 3 years. All the innocent comments about the house being a lot to manage, all the little glances at my shelves. He hadn't been curious, he'd been taking inventory. The very next day, Patrick and Lila arrived bright and early, dressed like they were heading to a brunch for people who own yachts. And they weren't alone. They brought a man named Gregory, whom they introduced as an investment consultant we've been working with. Gregory had a leather briefcase, a silk tie, and the kind of smile that feels like it should come with a disclaimer. He sat up at my kitchen table, pulled out a stack of papers, and started talking about future-proofing and simplifying decision-making processes. About halfway through his little presentation, I realized what these papers were: power of attorney forms, estate planning documents, and something about transferring assets to a more secure structure. All things that once signed would have given Patrick and Lila control over my finances, my property, and even my medical care. I kept my face pleasant, nodding and asking polite questions while inside I was thinking, you've got to be kidding me. When Gregory finished, Lila looked at me with that hostess smile of hers and said, "We can take care of all of this for you, Clara. You won't have to lift a finger." I told them I'd think about it. Then I gathered up the papers, thanked Gregory for his time, and walked them all to the door. The second they pulled out of the driveway, I picked up the phone and called my attorney, Ms. Rowan. When I explained what had just happened, she didn't even pause. "Clara," she said, "if you sign those, you may as well hand them the keys to your life." After hanging up with Ms. Rowan, I sat there at my kitchen table with the stack of documents in front of me, my coffee going lukewarm, thinking, all right, Clara, you're in deeper than you thought. That's when Ms. Rowan called me back. She said she'd been thinking about our conversation and wanted to put me in touch with someone she trusted, a private investigator named Malcolm Ortiz. Now, I've never hired a private investigator in my life. The closest I'd come was watching reruns of those detective shows Harold liked, where everyone seemed to wear trench coats and follow people down rainy alleys. But when I met Malcolm, I realized he was more practical than theatrical. He was in his late 50s, stocky, with kind eyes that still missed nothing. His suit was a little wrinkled, his shoes scuffed, but his handshake told me he meant business. We sat in my living room and I poured him tea in my best stoneware mugs, the ones with the glaze that looks like ocean foam. He took out a small notepad and started asking questions. "Tell me about Patrick. Tell me about Lila. Tell me why you think something's wrong." I gave him the whole rundown, from the innocent questions about my will to Gregory the consultant showing up with his magic stack of papers. Malcolm didn't interrupt much, just made notes and nodded. Then he leaned back and said, "All right, here's what I know so far." And that's when he started laying out details that made me feel like I was sitting in the middle of my own mystery novel. Lila, it turned out, had been married twice before. Both times to men at least 20 years older than her. Both men died within a few years of marrying her. One of them left her a very generous life insurance payout, which she somehow managed to burn through in record time. The other? Malcolm said the circumstances were questionable, but the case had been closed. Patrick's record wasn't as dramatic but was just as troubling. Malcolm had traced several failed property investments over the last 5 years. Up to his eyeballs in debt, was how Malcolm put it. Several loans, some with interest rates that made me wince. I sat there clutching my mug, thinking my son is in deep trouble, and my daughter-in-law is experienced in cashing in on deep trouble. Then Malcolm opened his briefcase. Out came a set of the tiniest microphones I'd ever seen, each one no bigger than a shirt button. "These are going in your studio, your living room, and yes, even the guest room," he said. "Anywhere they might talk when you're not around." He also pulled out a delicate silver necklace. "And this," he said, "is a recorder. Wear it whenever they're here. If they're plotting, I want to hear it. Word for word." I held the necklace in my palm, feeling both absurd and strangely powerful. "I feel like I've just been drafted into a crime show," I told him. "Except instead of a glamorous detective, they've got me, an old woman in an apron who teaches pottery." Malcolm smiled. "Sometimes that's exactly the advantage you need." By the time he left, the microphones were in place, the necklace was around my neck, and I had the unsettling realization that my quiet, tidy home had just become a stage. Only I didn't know what scene we'd be performing next. It didn't take long before my diagnosis became their golden ticket to move right in. One afternoon, Patrick announced, in that practical tone of his, "Mom, we've brought over a few things so we can be closer if you need us." A few things turned out to be half their closet and enough personal items to open a pop-up boutique in my guest room. Lila, of course, made herself right at home. Within hours, she had reorganized my spice rack for efficiency, which meant cinnamon was suddenly next to paprika, and I had to go on a scavenger hunt every time I made tea. My pottery tools didn't escape her reach either. I walked into my studio to find my trimming knives in one drawer, my carving loops in another, and the sponges stacked by color like I was running a showroom instead of a working space. Then came the help with my medications. Lila breezed into the kitchen one morning with that bright, hostessy smile and said, "I've tidied up your pill shelf, it was getting cluttered." I didn't think much of it until a few days later, when I went to take my blood pressure tablets and noticed the count was off. Not drastically, just a couple missing. The kind of difference that could easily be brushed off as me forgetting I'd taken them. But I knew exactly how many were in that bottle. That's when I realized they weren't just helping. They were testing something. And then the gaslighting began. Lila told me she found my kiln still on one night after I'd gone to bed. That kiln takes nearly an hour to cool down, and I hadn't fired it in 2 days. Patrick claimed I'd left the front door unlocked when I went out. I distinctly remembered locking it. I always double-check because Harold used to tease me about being part security guard. These little incidents kept happening. Lila noticed I'd put the tea towels in the wrong drawer. Patrick heard I'd repeated the same story twice in one conversation. Each one seemed harmless enough on its own, but I could see the pattern. They were planting seeds. Mom's getting forgetful. Mom can't handle things anymore. I found myself pausing before answering questions, wondering if they'd use my words against me later. When I went into the kitchen, I started photographing the stove dials with my phone, just to prove I'd turned it off. I even took a picture of the locked front door one morning, though I felt ridiculous doing it. The worst part was how cheerful they were while doing it. They never said anything outright unkind. Instead, it was all wrapped in concern. Patrick would tilt his head and say, "Don't worry, Mom, we'll handle it." Lila would pat my arm like I was a nervous guest at her dinner party. It was exhausting, like living in a play where everyone else knew the script except me. But I kept reminding myself, the microphones were recording, and I wasn't imagining this. They wanted me to question my own memory, but I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction. It was just after supper when the phone rang, and I saw Malcolm's name on the screen. His voice didn't have its usual easy calm. Instead, it had the kind of edge people get when they're trying not to alarm you but know they have to. "I need you to listen carefully, Clara," he said. I intercepted a call between Lila and someone she referred to as the specialist. Well, that was vague enough to make my stomach knot up right there. "Specialist in what?" I asked. "That's the problem," he said. "They were discussing a way to give you something that would look exactly like a natural stroke. The timing they mentioned? Within the week." I gripped the phone tighter. "Why the rush?" He hesitated and then, "Because Patrick apparently has what Lila called financial deadlines." I swear I could feel my eyebrows hit my hairline. I'd suspected money troubles, but this sounded like something out of one of those tense movies where the main character's coffee is always in danger. Malcolm told me to keep playing along, to act weaker, let Lila fuss over me, but not to actually take anything she gave me. "I'll handle the rest," he said. The next morning, Malcolm stopped by under the pretense of dropping off some important papers from Ms. Rowan. While Patrick and Lila were out running errands, he swapped my regular pills for placebos, identical in size, shape, and color. "If they're planning something, this will keep you safe and give us proof," he explained. I'll admit, wearing that pendant recorder and swallowing sugar pills while pretending to be too tired to fold laundry felt, well, theatrical. Like I was auditioning for the role of hapless old lady in a local community play. But every time I thought about those financial deadlines, I could almost hear a countdown clock ticking in my head. I leaned into my role. I let Lila carry my tea to the couch, even though it took all my willpower not to tell her she was holding the mug wrong. I sighed more than usual when climbing the stairs. I forgot where I'd put the TV remote and let Patrick find it for me. Right there on the coffee table. Meanwhile, every little sound in the house set me on edge. A floorboard creak upstairs would have me glancing at the clock, wondering what they were up to. When the wind rattled the kitchen window, I half expected to find someone tampering with the back door. Even the ice maker startled me one night. I've lived in this house for 40 years, and I've never felt like a stranger in it, until that week. Malcolm checked in daily, sometimes in person, sometimes by phone, reminding me that we needed patience. "If they make a move while the recorders are rolling, we'll have them," he said. Patience is not my strongest quality. But in this case, I figured patience and a whole lot of acting might just keep me alive. By day 9 of my so-called 2-week death sentence, I'd gotten into a routine: make coffee, water the geraniums, pretend to be frail, repeat. That morning, I padded into the kitchen in my robe, the smell of the coffee grounds already waking me up, when the phone rang. It was Malcolm, and his voice was sharp. "Clara, you need to get out right now. They've moved up the timeline." That woke me up faster than caffeine. "Moved it up how much?" "They're ready today. Don't pack, don't explain." Just go. I didn't even hang up properly. Just grabbed my purse and reached for my car keys. But before I could make it to the back door, I heard the faint click of heels on the stairs. There was Lila, already dressed like she'd stepped out of one of her photo shoots, hair perfect, makeup flawless, and in her right hand a syringe. She leaned on the banister, smiling like a cat that's cornered a mouse. "You've been dragging this out, Clara. Time to make it easy on all of us." My eyes went straight to the syringe. "Where's Patrick?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She actually laughed. A light, tinkling sound that didn't match the situation. "Upstairs. Getting ready to play the grieving son. He's been practicing." I don't know why, but the idea of my son rehearsing a tragic face in the mirror almost made me angrier than the syringe. There's something particularly insulting about plotting against someone and making it theatrical. Just then, from far away, I heard sirens. Lila's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "They won't get here in time," she said, taking a step forward. I had maybe 3 seconds to make a choice. Fortunately, I already had the coffee pot in my hand. Years of lifting heavy clay pieces in and out of my kiln gave me more arm strength than she probably realized. I swung it with every ounce of that strength. The pot connected with her wrist, the glass shattered, and coffee splashed everywhere, hot but not boiling. She yelped, the syringe hitting the floor and rolling under the kitchen table. And then the front door burst open. The police swept in like something out of a TV drama, voices firm but calm, telling her to put her hands where they could see them. One officer asked me, "Where's your son?" "Upstairs," I said, still clutching the broken handle of my coffee pot. "You'll find him in a black suit, rehearsing in the mirror." They did. Patrick didn't even protest, just kept repeating, "I don't know what's going on," like a broken record. Meanwhile, I stood there in my robe and slippers, coffee dripping onto the floor, thinking, well, Clara, that's one way to start the day. When all was said and done, the case against Patrick and Lila could have been wrapped in a bow. The police had the recordings, the syringe, Malcolm's meticulous report, and even a nice little timeline that fit together so neatly it could have been printed in one of those glossy true crime magazines. Patrick and Lila were both arrested on charges of attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud. It turns out those sound just as serious when an officer says them in your living room as they do in a courtroom drama. Lila's past marriages, the two that had always seemed a little too unlucky, are now being looked at by people with badges and notepads. I made one very quick decision. I cut them both out of my will. Not a penny, not a teacup, nothing. Instead, I called up a few trusted contacts in the art world, sold off several of my higher value pieces, and started the Morton Creative Arts Foundation. We now give scholarships to young artists, fund local pottery workshops, and even help small-town galleries put on their first exhibitions. Harold would have loved that. Of course, I kept enough to live comfortably. I'm not trying to be a martyr here. I still have my cozy house, my studio, and enough left over for the occasional trip. I've been eyeing a pottery festival in Oregon and a ceramic symposium in Italy. Just because you're in your 70s doesn't mean you can't enjoy a little adventure. As for my classes, I kept teaching. In fact, I've added more sessions. I find it's good for me to be around people who aren't secretly trying to steal my will to live along with my art collection. Plus, there's something about showing a teenager how to center clay on the wheel that makes me forget, for a while, the messier parts of life. Do I miss my son? I miss the little boy he used to be. The one who'd sit beside me in the studio making lopsided clay animals and giggling when the glaze ran in unexpected patterns. But that boy's been gone for a long time. The man who took his place saw me as a bank account with a pulse. And if I'm being blunt, he tried to remove the pulse part. I've learned a hard truth. Sometimes blood isn't family. Sometimes, family is the neighbor who brings you soup when you're sick, or the student who remembers your birthday, or the friend who insists you take the last slice of pie even though they wanted it. If you take anything from my story, it's this: don't wait for proof. When your instincts are screaming at you, protect yourself. I nearly waited too long, and if it weren't for a good lawyer, a better investigator, and a coffee pot with perfect aim, I might not be here to tell you any of it.
Share your thoughts in the comments. How would you have handled discovering that your own child was plotting against you? If you liked the story, subscribe to the channel and give us a like.